So to our introductory mix of beat writers and beat poets, we thought it would be good and fun and edifying to add a little bit of Bob Kaufman. He really does broaden or widen our sense of beat poetry. Damon described him as, quote, Maria Damon, a street poet, a people's poet, a poet's poet, a jazz poet, a surrealist poet, a modernist poet, a postmodernist poet, an African-American poet, a black poet, a Negro poet, a New Orleans poet, a San Francisco poet, a lyric poet, a beat poet. So he's, been thought of in a multiplicity of ways. Later overshadowed by what she described as his white, formally educated contemporaries, Ginsberg, Kerouac, Burroughs, etc. He was actually, if you do the historical work, he was a major force in the San Francisco scene from 1955 to 1960. He was known as a brilliant extemporizer, and so much of his extemporizing was performance in bars and outside of bookstores that are lost. He was famous for his rapid-fire aphorisms mixed with the modernist poetry that he had memorized. He'd memorized the whole modernist canon and mixed beat improvisation and aphoristic sayings with that. He very possibly invented the term beatnik, N-I-K at the end, which is a diminutive Russian-based suffix that tends, if you put nick behind something, it tends to be a diminution. It tends to be a kind of there, you're a beatnik, not a beat, but a beatnik. But he meant it as very positive. Either he did that or the newspaper columnist Herb Caen, who was following the beat movement for the San Francisco Examiner, used the word beatnik to describe Bob Kaufman. So he was known for his outrageous antics, and really in our course, probably the clearest predecessor to him would be the pre-Neo-Dada Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, the Baroness. Outrageous antics, most of which were lost, performances, most of which were lost. Some of the San Francisco scene poets did not take him seriously, although Ginsberg and Kerouac and others did. And he was regularly brutalized by the North Beach police for being a so-called vagrant. But he co-founded I have this book here. He co-founded a beat mimeograph magazine called Beatitude with Allen Ginsberg, and several times, this is a 1960 anthology, Beatitude anthology, co-edited by Bob Kaufman and Allen Ginsberg. And in this book, he publishes a series called Jail Poems, which are a series of short poems that were indeed written in jail after he'd gotten beaten up one of those times. And what I want to do is read you a selection of the sections of jail poems and just talk about them with you in any order, any response at all. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to read starting with section 3 of Jail Poems. 3. In a universe of cells, who is not in jail? Jailers in a world of hospitals, who is not sick? Doctors, a golden sardine is swimming in my head. Oh, we know some things, man, about some things like jazz and jails and God. Saturday is a good day to go to jail. 4. Now they give a new form, quivering jelly-like. That proves any boy can be president of Muscatel. Muscatel? Cheap, sweet wine. That's the wino's wine. That proves any boy can be president of Muscatel. It's a great line. They are mad at him because he's one of them. Gray speckled white nakedness, stinking fingers grasping toilet bowls. Mr. America wants to bathe. Look, on the floor, lying across America's face. What am I doing? Feeling compassion? When he comes out of it, he will help kill me. He probably hates beatniks. 7. Someone who I am is no one. Something I have done is nothing. Some place I have been is nowhere. I am not me. What of the answers I must find questions for? All these strange streets I must find cities for. Thank God for beatniks. And now section 19. One day, Adolf Hitler had nothing to do. All the Jews were burned, artists all destroyed. Adolf Hitler was very bored, even with Eva. So he moved to San Francisco, became an ordinary policeman, devoted himself to stamping out beatniks. And I said that was 19, it's actually 14. Now 19. 2 lines. Sitting here writing things on paper instead of sticking the pencil into the air. 22. Caught in imaginary webs of conscience, I weep over my acts, yet believe. And 2 more, the last 2 of the sequence. There are 35 in jail poems. Here's 34. The defective on the floor, mumbling, was once a man who shouted across tables. And 35. Come, help flatten a raindrop. What's his social view of his comrades in the jails? Dave, what evidence do we have of that?
In the number 3 that you read, it ends with, Saturday is a good day to go to jail.
What does that mean? It means something very specific.
It means you're in all weekend.
Exactly. It's not a good day to go to jail. In fact, sometimes law enforcement will pick people up late on Friday just so they're not going to get to see a judge until Monday. So what he's saying is actually...
Because the courts are closed or
Right.
not interested in these lousy cases.
So Saturday is a good day to jail. To go to jail, he's saying he likes it in there. He's got a camaraderie in there.
Or that
he's going to have some
he
company.
he needs a roof over his head, so he's going to go on Saturday, so he gets to stay in and
That's a good point.
not get flattened by raindrops.
When he says in a universe of cells, who is not in jail?
He could be saying, like, we're all imprisoned by something, but he could also be saying, like, oppression is so systematic in this country that it's literally a world of cells, and there are people who aren't in jail. They're jailers because they're in
likens it to
hospitals.
sickness in hospitals. When you get sick, you're in a hospital, everyone gets sick.
Right.
And so anyone that he's interested in is in jail. It's a very Thoreauvian, as in Henry David Thoreau, view of who's out of jail. So if his beat friends come who have some money, or just anybody who has some money to bail him out, what he would say is what Thoreau said to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a very proper pseudo-radical or radical guy. And Thoreau famously said, Emerson said, David, Henry, what are you doing there? Why are you in there? And Thoreau famously said, why are you out there? And I think in a universe of cells, who is not in jail is a way of saying, this is where the good people, you want to be beat? You want to be beatnik? They're in here.
Right, because he answers his own question with jailers. So, meaning if you're not in jail, you must be a jailer.
Start with Lily, but we'll go around. I'll reread section 7 because not only does it conjure up Dickinson's I'm Nobody, Who Are You, but it also conjures Gwendolyn Brooks' poem that we've talked about in ModPo about a boy breaking glass because that boy thinks of himself as having no identity or being invisible, right? So to some degree, this particular marginalization is about being no one and having no effect. Someone who I am is no one. Something I have done is nothing. Someplace I have been is nowhere. I am not me. What of the answers I must find questions for? All these strange streets I must find cities for. Thank God for beats.
I think that's interesting in terms of he's writing this in jail, in a place where your identity becomes very shifted from what it is outside of the facility, right? And so I think he's trying to deal with that sort of dislocation of identity with setting while in jail. I am not me is pretty powerful and very, he creates such separation from himself. Thank God for beatniks.
That's hard to take seriously all these years later, but what if we just sort of get sincerely back there? Here's a guy who gets constantly beat up by the North Beach police, who is egged into performance by his supposed colleagues. In that context, Bob Kaufman, who has really something to say, can only find his colleagues after he's been beaten up and put in jail, and then he finds, in a way, he's inspired to build a city based on that marginalization. So thank God for beatniks. It's hard to see it as unironic, but in a way, I think he's saying this is how we will build the new city. Sitting here writing things on paper instead of sticking the pencil into the air. 2-line item. What do you want to do something with that?
I think he's like struggling with maybe the idea that writing isn't enough, and that there should be more action that he could be doing, and maybe that's because he's in jail, or because he's just struggling with that in general and trying to do more.
Let's keep going with this. Anybody else? I mean, the form of this poem is 35 little pieces, fragments. And when you're in jail and there's a lot of interruptions, he wrote these in jail apparently. And when you're in jail and there's a lot of people being thrown in the cell with you, this is not penitentiary. This is not Alcatraz. He writes these things in pieces, a little like Lainey Brown's daily sonnets with the constant interruption of her motherhood. He's basically saying this is the way it's going to have to come out. And sticking the pencil into the air seems one of you just said it's like a polemical gesture, but I actually think of it as a kind of blocked bullshit poet who's just sitting in a cafe somewhere. I think he's actually writing things on paper and not doing that poetic performance thing. I think he's actually trying to get the work done. So after lots of poetic and political activity, he was affiliated for a while with the Communist Party of the United States, actually. That's a little known, but he was. He, by the way, published a pamphlet called the Abominist Manifesto, as opposed to the Communist Manifesto. So abominist means like an abomination. So he was still very radical, but he split from the Communist Party. So after lots of poetic and political activity through the 50s and the early 60s, he declared solidarity with the world's poor and disenfranchised, and took a vow of silence around 1963. Some people say it was a response to the assassination of Kennedy. Some people say it just happened in '63. He took a vow of silence, didn't write and didn't speak for about 10 years, until a few days after the end, or the stated end, of the Vietnamese War, American involvement in Vietnam, at which point he stopped his vow of silence and wrote some more poems. The defective on the floor, defective is a noun, the defective person on the floor, the defective on the floor. This guy who's gone insane, who's mumbling, who's vomiting on the floor here, who's reaching for the toilet, this guy, the defective on the floor mumbling, was once a man who shouted across tables, was engaged in intense discussions. And this is what happens in my world, Bob Kaufman is saying, to those who have an idealistic project, to those who are optimistic about the future. They get put in jail and they're thought of as insane. This is the great beat reversal. Ginsberg was very good about it in Howl because he wrote it for Carl Solomon, who was put in a psychiatric institution, as Ginsberg was, given shock treatments, so you get One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which comes as a slightly later generation, maybe roughly the same generation, the idea that these people who are saying, I am America, you made me crazy, I read Time magazine, Time magazine makes me crazy, can you look at us, please? Can you look at this post-war generation? We have all these criticisms of America, and we're so all focused on centrism and consensus and mainstreaming and suburbanism and, worrying about running over toads and all that stuff, when the best minds of my generation, this defective on the floor, was once someone who participated loudly in the political conversations that America is supposed to be about. And now this person is thought of as insane. In fact, the people who are ready to have the real conversations that the society needs are in jail. And that's why it's a jail poem, because he's going to look for the guys there and revive them. So I think of his project as a finding, an unforgetting, a reconstruction of all those lost voices, and really a kind of fun celebration of them, because he uses that beat humor.